unfortunately, is the business email compromise. And it's really, really frequent in the legal industry. And I know this because when we looked at our email quarantine reports, or people say, I want this email report, often what we get is emails from our counterparties that we work with, other law firms in, whether Malaysia, Singapore, around the region, America, whatever, that have been hacked, and hackers are sending follow-on phishing emails from their hacked mailboxes. The browser is incredibly important. I mean, it's almost like an old joke now that browser is the new operating system, and it's pretty close to it, right? Things like Chromebooks illustrate it poignantly, say, all you need is a browser to do a lot of your business. So 100% true. But for me, what I think is so special about browser, that it is the authentication gateway to practically everything. Almost no company that has a modern stack does not authenticate everything through their browser, right? If you're sitting in the browser, have the means of getting data out to the browser, you can smash anything today, right? Outside of very few industries that have a hardware requirement, like parts of telcos, things that have to work offline. To me, that's why the browser is important. It's not the apps, it is the authentication gateway for everything.
Ever been a hacker turned incident responder who now leads cybersecurity for one of Asia's most prestigious law firms? That's our guest today, Konrads Klints, CISO at Rajah and Tann Asia. He brings together a rare combination of deep technical knowledge, business acumen, and great communication skills. Konrads, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you were a hacker, a developer, an incident responder, but now you're a CISO at a law firm.
Yes.
How did all of these paths come together for you?
Well, I mean, the short version of that was that I think computers have mesmerized me since I was little. It felt like it's a window to a different world less ordinary. And the early communities in the 90s that you could sort of get into without being part of a corporation, which coming from Baltics and Latvia, and as a kid, you obviously not. All you could get was in these kind of hacker communities, or just Linux sysadmin communities. And when I wanted to learn something about Linux, which I thought, that's what's really cool, no books to buy. So you start to read, using Alta Vista, I guess. Mm-hmm. And the only things that came up for free were how to hack Unix computers. So I thought that's what the computers were about. So I started reading those, and then sometime later, I wanted my own computer, and I asked my dad, say, hey, how did you, can I get a computer? And he just said, you got to do something useful with it. So I couldn't think of anything else, but I said, okay, I want to learn how to program. And so we hired like a tutor. And then I think there was just a bit of demand, and I sort of started doing some programming after school. And like, I was 15, 16, I think I got my first full-time paid job. Full-time may be a stretch. I just went for a couple hours and after school, but that's what I did. Yeah. And then, I made some money using programming. I think it was PHP mainly. I met a girlfriend who is now my wife. And at some point she said, we need stable income to get a job. And so she gave me a newspaper, and KPMG were hiring, and they said, do you know anything about penetration testing? And I said, no, but I can learn. And they were kind enough to go like, that guy is probably smart enough to learn something. And yeah, that sort of was my career for penetration testing. Then I moved to London, and then the customers increasingly were saying, that's great, you point out flaws, somebody already hacked them, can you do something about it? And so we kind of took some of the practices that were forensic practices, and I just saw that incident response is hacking in reverse. That's how I've always seen it. So if you know how to hack it, you can just work backwards. What is it they could have potentially done? So I did that, and turns out that I was quite good at it. I kind of learned pretty early on that like you have to manage your clients as well. So not just tech stuff, but also what they think, and kind of get them out of the slump emotionally or so. And that was what after some time, I think Brexit hit, and then I moved to Singapore here to lead incident response practice. And after some time, as it happens in the Big Four practice, you figure out you're not making partner, or you are. So I realized I'm not. And then I said, well, what's next? So kind of the only job I then by then haven't done was to actually own the risk. So then Rajah and Tann approached me and said, "Hey, oh, you'd like to own some risk?" And I said, "That sounds interesting. Thank you." So here I am.
That's great. That's great. I remember we had a good conversation a few years ago when we were being introduced, and you were my incident response, lead for our incident response retainer at the company I was working for in Singapore. And I was really somewhat afraid about, using KPMG, and I don't know why I was. I just didn't have a lot of experience with KPMG. But I remember talking to you and your partners and how comfortable you made me feel about if I was in trouble, that you'd be able to help me with it. Right. And yeah, so I think your communication skills were really good. I mean, you obviously had the technical background on the work that was needed as an incident responder, but you did make me feel very comfortable about it. And so I really did appreciate it. It helped me get one of those little check boxes out of my way so that I could continue working on what I was needing to work on. But yeah, it was good. I really,
Thanks for that.
really appreciate that. Yeah. So you were telling me that you started in the Baltics, right? You had
That's right,
at an early age. Then you went to the UK. Was that London you said you went to?
Yeah. It's another funny sort of story. I had a young child, and although KPMG were paying me decent money, we couldn't figure out that we could actually economically make it, and so wondering what to do. And I had met some people at KPMG in around Europe, and my wife said, "Why don't we move? Or do you have any other ideas?" And so I called somebody, and it turns out that they knew me. And then my conversation was the interview for KPMG Baltics to UK was, "Do you know penetration testing?" Yeah, I do. "So where do you want to live? Do you know where you're going to buy your kids' shoes?" That was it, right? So
yeah,
I think it was a different time, but it was quite nice. And we moved to London. She lived pretty centrally. So I think I called it my home for a long time, and in some way I still miss it.
yeah. I liked visiting London. I never lived there, but I did like to visit. And then you went to Singapore. How long were you in the How long were you in the UK before you transitioned to Singapore?
Almost 9 years. We came in 2011 early.
Wow.
And I still remember the ride from the London Gatwick to my temporary apartment, and then Brexit hit, and I think we kind of felt like that's not a great place to be anymore, for mostly economic reasons. I guess we were at this time where we were thinking, if we stay here, we're going to stay here for longer, and we didn't quite feel that we've lived enough places around the world. So it was a nice, nice way. And again, just I guess time and place, KPMG were nice enough to let me move over.
Well, great. And then, because I met you in Singapore, right? And so what was the biggest cultural shock you've had around cybersecurity, right? You've been in Eastern Europe, London, Singapore. What's the biggest cultural shock you've had around cybersecurity?
Well, I think just purely from incident response perspective, it was the degree of surprise. And maybe let me just say that if you work kind of in the what is, let's say, called former Soviet Union, right? Which Latvia was, unfortunately, for a while. Everybody has a view that all computers are fallible, they're hackable. There's tons of smart people that are going to do some damage to you if you're not careful about this. So everybody knew there was something. Nobody ever trusted this, right? And then when you came to UK, because of the high degree of maturity of cybersecurity, from government and then financial services, they knew you had to be very cautious, and it's really dangerous. And we had those conversations. You didn't have to start from position of like, this can happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like degrees of awareness were varied, right? But there was always that this could happen. And when it came to Singapore, the people generally surprised, like, oh my God, I got the cyber insurance. I felt like I was bamboozled into buying this. Now I actually need it. And that's like, cool, right? So I think the degree of surprise that this can be real, I think in Singapore was and maybe that's like a bit of cultural, right? I mean, as Singapore is incredibly safe. We leave our wallets, phones on tables at cafes, and we wander off to get food or back or to the washrooms, right? And I think that sort of idea of safety they thought it was transpires to everything. And so cyberspace is it's a pretty wild place.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting, and like in that there's such awareness campaigns around fraud and cyber in Singapore. It seems to pop up everywhere. And
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
you watch the news, it's kind of interesting that people are getting defrauded and such, and they're surprised that it happened to them. And it's like it's in there. You can see it in their faces on TV that someone bamboozled them or attacked them or took over their phones or did whatever. It's somewhat of a shock. Whereas, like you said, in other places, it's like where we feel nervous about everything. Like I'm probably a bad example being a CISO. It's like I don't want to. I look at any email that I don't know what it is, and I'm like delete. Right, just immediately. The people are calling me, "Hey, did you get my email?" I don't know your address here. So, but I think it's different levels of awareness for sure. I think so.
I think that probably was the big thing for it. Yeah, I think just the degree of surprise, and as you said, there's a lot of awareness now, and there's lots of I guess campaigns and also
Yeah.
regulations coming into play slowly, bit by bit. But if the government for 50 years has tried to assure the population that everything is safe, it's really tricky to reverse that in 5 years.
Right. I agree. Well, let's talk about what's the biggest misconception about cybersecurity that you encounter in the legal industry. We're gonna, you've worked. I imagine you've worked with a lot of different industries. Having worked with KPMG, is the legal industry different? Do they have different conceptions about cybersecurity than other industries?
I think there's this culture. Culture maybe is the biggest the biggest element, and especially sort of what legal industry is. So one of the parts of legal industry that's always been a practitioner led, like professional led, right? So most legal firms are partnerships which people that serve there for a while become sufficiently trusted that their peers select them, and they're sort of elected into based on their, let's say, past performance. Whereas in other industries, people are looking for skills. So if they need a person that does say manufacturing, right? They're not necessarily looking for the person that's been in the industry for the longest. They're looking like, I have this need for skills. Where can I get that person? Whereas in the legal industry, often they always look inside first, significantly, rather than trying to match those skills. And so a lot of instincts that people have developed in the way coming up to senior leadership positions don't necessarily apply to modern IT and cybersecurity. That's not to say that they're underskilled, and some of the lawyers I met, including my own firm, some of the smartest, sharpest people you'll encounter ever, but they're just not exposed to this. And so as a result, some of those decisions they're not made out of experience. They're made out of some kind of knowledge, and I think that makes it tricky. And so, for example, I have the dubious honor of being the first CISO for a law firm in ASEAN. And I would sort of say it speaks more about the ASEAN law firms than it speaks about myself. Whereas in Australia, which is a bit further ahead of the curve, kind of those lateral appointments are far more common, right? So I think there's this kind of element of maturity of development. And then the other part is, and this is really varies kind of firm by firm, is how much technology investment the firm is willing to make. Because in those kind of partnership structures, any dollar you don't spend is a dollar you can potentially pay to yourself. And some firms have more long-term perspective. Like, for example, again, my own firm has notoriously long-term perspective, right? Really, they're thinking about 10 years ahead. How we're going to do that, what's going to happen to the people that just joined in the firm. But others are much more short-term, so on. And so there's this instinct of, let's just save cost, and things that appear cheaper today obviously don't play out to be cheaper in the long term. Those are maybe some of the bits in there. But I think the major change is that institutional clients are increasingly putting pressure on law firms. They say, look, we're sharing this data with you. You got to be really good. And they're also willing to cut ties out of late security concerns as well. which is a really big shift. And if you think about it, how it happens internally, right? So let's say you have somebody that's, likes law firm Acme, and they go like, I want these guys to come in and, help me out. And then they have a data breach or some, compliance gap. And this person internally, has to think, am I going to stick my neck out for them because they're good? Or there's other people that are about just as good. And I think increasingly they're erring on the side of like, look, if you're not meeting this, it's not worth my career. So they get ties, and that's a big wake up call.
Yeah, so it has a direct impact to their ability to maintain clients. It sounds like if they're
yes, and increasingly so.
Yeah, so in the software industry, where I'm at right now, and also as a CISO in a company, I'm always asking about third-party risk management and how, making sure that we understand what our relationship is with respect to cybersecurity and our data and who's processing our data and all those kinds of things. The bigger the law firm, the bigger the customers, the bigger the clients, more likely they're going to have processes in place to make sure that their vendors are doing the right things from a security perspective. I wouldn't say that lawyers are commodity products, right? But there are a lot of very competitive law firms in the world that if you have one really good law firm, there's another really good law firm that can help you too, right? So it's not like they're commodities, but at the same time, but there are a lot of good quality attorneys out there. And this happens just in the nature of the legal business is that I know that when I've talked to lawyers, they with different kinds of matters, one of the things that they do is make sure that that there's not they don't have a conflict of interest, right?
Correct.
And so they may not even be able to take you on as a customer or
Absolutely.
a client because of a conflict of interest. And so the movement of you as a client to one law firm or to another law firm happens more often than I think people are aware. And then with additional concerns, I think that, of course they would move quickly as well too. So interesting. That's interesting. Well, what do you think what are the biggest threats in the legal industry? There's a lot of confidential data. I know that the firms that I've used in the United States, we always had ways of sharing data securely, way better than some of my other vendors, right, that I've had. But I've also dealt with law firms and matters that didn't have a secure ways of, sharing files and those kinds of things. But so what do you think the biggest threats in the industry are?
Well, so, the way we think about it, broadly speaking, is we look at three main threats that drive our security program, plus compliance, right? I'll always add the plus compliance element to this. So the one of that is ransomware, and that's because the law firms are target of choice. So it's literally like, it's always triaged and prioritized, from like leak credentials way up top, right? Exactly like you said, lost confidential information. Even if you have to disclose this to the public, if you settle for money, there's like an incentive because you're protecting your client's interest, right? So it's always up top there. So we gotta be like, I don't want to say 100% secure, but pretty much 100% secure against traditional ransomware. Like, and anything that is not there, we'll stamp it out judiciously, right? We just have no tolerance for that stuff because there's no excuse to enable. Like, there's no business reasons to be sloppy in that space. The other bit is unfortunately, the business email compromise, and it's really, really frequent in the legal industry. And I know this because when we looked at our email quarantine reports, or people say, I want this email report, often what we get is emails from our counterparties that we work with, other law firms in, whether Malaysia, Singapore, around the region, America, whatever, that have been hacked, and hackers are sending follow-on phishing emails from their hacked mailboxes, and I have to explain them to my lawyers is not only this is not a legitimate client email or legitimate counterparty email, they're also being hacked, and now we need to assess if we shared any information with these guys that we need to record that. So that's really unfortunate. And sometimes it's almost like a comedy. So one case, we have this lawyer saying, hey, I think this is relevant to my case. I go like, it might be, but it's actually, phishing that's being sent on this. And the transaction we were involved, like, it has 5 parties. That's us, a bank, another law firm, financial advisors. 3 days later, the financial advisor sending the same email. So they clicked, right? So we're in the bank go like, maybe we need to, So there's also that's a second big thing. And the third big thing is we look at what we call, again, our people, right? And we look at those behaviors as accidental, reckless, and malicious as well. And so we need to mitigate this accidental oversharing or inappropriate sharing. And that's where your comment about secure means of sharing files are really important. So we try to find with the client some way that's comfortable for them. And I think that's really tricky because we have clients from all over ASEAN, and some of them will only do business on WeChat. That's it, right? No other way. You may send them an email for an official record, but that's about as much as it goes. And if we want that business, we have to accommodate those usual means of communication. And I think for me, that occupies a lot of my mind on how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you're reminding me of a problem I had too, just the WeChat thing. Because there's a lot of stuff that goes on through WeChat. I mean, I know that we've had personal information stolen. I mean, like the recently Coinbase had that insider threat kind of attack that happened in their call centers, right? And WeChat is, I'm talking about WeChat in respect to like just third-party outsourcing, but that's what I think the Coinbase problem is, you have a third-party outsourced contract and you have all these tools and everything that are around so that you can communicate with people. And some of those channels are monitored and some of those channels are not monitored. Email is monitored. Every law firm is going to have email being monitored and have Purview or Purview equivalent DLP kind of tools, those kinds of things to happen what's going on their machines and in their email and their file systems. However, when you start getting into these other communication channels like WeChat, WhatsApp, etc., where you're going to have customer interactions, those are much harder to monitor because of the diversity of endpoints that you're having to connect with, and they're all encrypted, and they're largely not monitored in any way, especially when you're doing it on your mobile devices, through some telecom network, right? I know in my case, what I wanted to do is figure out how do I get people to still do things in WeChat, because that's like a very important medium for
absolutely
B2C
or
for
a
sure.
Billion people, yeah.
It's
important medium for a billion people.
If you want to do business, you got to get on WeChat to go do it. But I tried to figure out like, hey, how do I get that monitored? And the best way that I found to monitor it was actually to get people to use the web client and then get some sort of capability. Like, we have like a business, we have a browser detection response capability that allows us to monitor those web, the things that happen in the browser. And we were able to use that to monitor WhatsApp for personal information going backwards and forwards and stuff, and check to see if someone was you're talking about business email compromise, but that also happens a lot in these other channels as well, where
Absolutely.
people are connecting and such and such. So being able to monitor those things, I think, is useful, right? And if you can't get both parties to be off the mobile, maybe you get one of the parties into your program so that you can monitor that channel. But wow, yeah, I would not have expected that to be a channel for communications with my lawyer. I stick to
it is ridiculously common.
I am not surprised either. Not surprised that it.
Let me maybe just again. So the cultural thing was very interesting. I used to come from a culture, and I grew up in where direct communication is it's more task oriented, more direct, and you kind of hash things out. And whereas in Singapore and I guess in the ASEAN countries, email is often seen as the official means of communication. And then a lot of kind of communication happens on the software medium. And often that instant messaging is seen as more software one-to-one medium.
Yeah.
And so if you think about your relationship with your lawyer, right, it can be a very intimate relationship because you're there solving some pretty existential sometimes problems for your business, or if it's a personal matter. I mean, we handle a small amount of, it's not the most of our business book, but we do handle private clients as well. And some of those are, like sensitive family matters, things like that, right? So, so that's where the medium is also sets the tone for this. But just like you mentioned, what we're trying to do is we're trying to move people off mobile data sharing onto the browser, exactly like you said. So we acknowledge that people are going to have chats and comms and on that, but there are policies that any decisions made have to be mirrored over email. That's the official record. And any data shared, if you absolutely must share it over, say, WeChat or WhatsApp, right? Then we have two rules, which is you have to encrypt it some way. Whatever the way that is, you have to encrypt it. And that's mostly so we mitigate the AI mining issue. And also in some way we mitigate maybe if the client gets hacked down the line, we're not that exposed. So it has to be encrypted and you have to do it through the browser, exactly for the reasons you cited. We want to have a record. We want to see where the data came from and so on and so forth. And so one of the issues I'm going to have later down the year is that I'm going to start to actually restricting the mobile comms. And I imagine I'm going to have a lot of angry emails.
Oh, I have no doubt. Anytime you change user behavior, there's friction, right? More conflict.
Absolutely.
But I think that what's good, in the same way, every dollar you don't spend, better to spend money on things that are going to be investments for you in the company versus ransoms or your own lawyers so that you can get back into regulatory compliance or whatever it is that you have to do. In your incident response career, I'm sure you have seen lots of people that have had to react and spend money in places that they didn't expect. Hopefully you have cybersecurity insurance, but often people don't. I mean, I think it's more prevalent today than it was maybe 10 years ago. But
yeah, the cyber insurance is also again, this is maybe a Southeast Asian thing as well, is that there's basically two circles of communication exist in business community. One of them is, as I joke it like this, is you've been speaking to a professional services advisor, right? Like a big four accountancy or maybe a big law firm. And what you end up doing when you speak to that circle of people, you tend to educate the people, they educate their clients and the clients learn from them. Just kind of, one club. But there's a whole really, really big club which never ever engage with this, right? Maybe they get an audit from professional, from like a big four, but that's about it. So you have this management that grew up successful, never ever interacting with these knowledge workers. And then when somebody says, well, I think you should get cyber insurance, they go like, why would I ever need it? I never got hacked. Cyber is not real. So, and it's just these circles don't necessarily overlap. And so sometimes when I used to pick up IR clients, like sometimes you go, yeah, they understand what it is. It's unfortunate. Like here's cyber insurance, and the panel engages, and we go through the motions, right? But sometimes they just go like, gee, God, and then I'm like, how did you find me? And I go like, well, I was classmates with that guy that worked at your firm, and I thought that he might know something, and and that guy's in tax, and he referred me to that guy, and then they referred me that, and that's how I met you. I'm like, okay, right, but it wasn't through that.
I was reading the Mandiant M-Trends report in May. I'm sure you're keeping up with all the threats that are happening in the world and reading people's reports and those kind of things. But one of the things I noticed was that, kind of going back to two things. One, people using the browser more and kind of getting people onto using browsers and further communication channels versus the mobile device.
Mm-hmm.
Trying and it isn't that you can't control those, I think the medium, like not the medium, but the application that you use matters, because we can't really do anything to instrument WhatsApp or WeChat on a mobile device, but we can instrument what it is that we're doing on a browser, whether that browser's on a desktop or a mobile device or an iPad or whatever. Two things that are kind of changing in the industry, and what I saw in the M-Trends report was that the number of attacks that are taking place in the browser, I counted up the types of attacks, and I would put it at like 60% of initial access traverse the browser to get into the environment. You've done a lot of incident response. I'm imagining that maybe over the last 10 years, you've seen that kind of increase as well. It used to be, well, I'm a bit older than you, but I remember in the mid 2000s.
No, John, surely.
Surely. But I remember in the 2000s, early 2010s, that most of the attacks that I was seeing were coming through Outlook, PDFs or Excel spreadsheets or those kinds of things. That was the initial access vector through phishing that was happening there, right? And then at some point in time, it started to traverse to links where people were trying to get you to click a link, and they stopped sending attachments with whatever. It still happens, right? It still happens. I still get them in my email, but we've gotten a lot better at addressing attachments in our email with respect to our technology that protects our email.
Yeah.
But when we get into these links and then they traverse to the browser, and then the browser kind of happens, right? And then people are in websites now. I think that it's increased a lot because of a couple of things. I think that there's more clouds being bought today than ever before. You have way more SaaS applications that are being deployed. In some cases, you can't even get licenses for technology that we used to buy and put into our data centers. They're just all SaaS apps today.
That's right.
And they're being pushed to you. And then there was a world where we used to have corporate offices and we had a data center, and then we could control the flows to our data and our applications. And then anything that was not that, we would know was bad, But today with the SaaS world, we have so many connections all over the place, and there's so much that's on AWS, GCP, and Azure. You can't just block GCP's address space, right? You don't even know what you would break. But I guess I'm, kind of going back to the browser thing. It's. I think one of the things I was surprised about was that how much we don't protect what's happening through the browser. We have lots of capabilities. We're using lots of more time is being spent, maybe not in the legal industry. I don't know if it's true for you, but imagine people are still using Word to do everything and they're using it on their laptops. But
yes.
But in the rest of the world, I would say that, the amount of time people spend in their browser is like 80% of their time going from one application to another application to another application. From my perspective, we're not really protecting that. What do you think for me, that's a big gap of where our users are spending time that we're not really protecting? Do you feel the same way about it? And tell me, like, from an incident response perspective, how do you feel about it? I mean, EDR is going to help you for sure, right? But that's after the attack has been successful as well.
Yeah. So maybe just to kind of get from also the retort. So, I mean, you touched on about 10 really interesting things that happened in cyber in the last 5 years, and they all interact in this, really interesting, chaotic and emergent system, right? To borrow a very old cybernetic principles. So you're absolutely right in that the browser is incredibly important. I mean, it's almost like an old joke now that the browser is the new operating system, and it's pretty close to it, right? And things like Chromebooks illustrate it poignantly, say, all you need is a browser to do a lot of your business. So 100% true, right? But for me, what I think is so special about browser that it is the authentication gateway to practically everything, right? Almost no company that has a modern stack does not authenticate everything through their browser, right? I mean, you access email, it's going to be Microsoft's Okta, Google, whatever, right? So if you're sitting in the browser, have the means of getting data out to the browser, you can smash anything today, right? Outside of very few industries that have a hardware requirement, like parts of telcos, things that have to work offline, right? That kind of stuff. So I think that, to me, that's why the browser is important. It's not the apps; it is the application gateway, authentication gateway for everything. And so that's why I think it's important. And if I look at it from our perspective, we just kind of, and I think all the trends are now picking up on this, and our reports are, there were two things that led to a lot of ransomware. One was the rapid professionalization of exploitation, right? So the ecosystem ransomware just became super good, right? They pre-scanned all the networks, they know what the software is. They buy, pay up to $1 million for 0 days to get the 0 days. Everything can be hacked, is being hacked within 48 hours. If you're lucky, 24 hours more likely, right? There's an 0 day out, 1 day out, everything's hacked. Like rapidly, right? And it's just so difficult to fathom that kind of stuff, right? So if you don't react in 24, 48 hours, so for us to get to that point, if we have perceived, so our systems, whatever the still internet-facing traditional systems we have, they get scanned, I think, anywhere between every 2 hours, 4 hours, and some that are kind of low priority every 24 hours, which is a very big departure from like, oh, we're going to do the scan once a month. I'm like, no, it is non-stop, right? It's hammering non-stop. And so if we do have an issue, that triggers basically a P0 alert, and everybody drops everything, and we have a time to patch or disable like in under an hour, right? So literally, I don't care where you are, we're yanking it down if we can't patch it, right? But the other big part was the info stealers, and that's the other major part is the crime ecosystem, the fraud, the ads, the everything is just crazy big, and it's crazy big of largely because of lawlessness of parts of the world. I'm not going to call them out necessarily, but like China went to the recent war in Myanmar was part triggered by that because China had enough of this stuff, so they armed one group to go after the other group, and unfortunately, it's led to a lot of human life. But that's the other part. And of course, where do they get these credentials from? They get these credentials by dumping the browser, right? And not only they get the credentials, which is now old school, they get session tokens. And you can stuff the session token in. And if you're not stupid, you get egress from a VPN or like a residential proxy that where you know the person's from. Most fraud systems are going to go like, yep, that's not legit. And off you go, right? So that I think is really, really scary. And sure enough, the browsers are doing something about it. But if you have something sitting on the computer that can interact with your browser, we have like a malicious extension, you're largely done for a lot of authentication. It's really, really tricky to mitigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things you said about that I agree with is that the browser is the gateway to identity, to authentication, authorization kind of activities.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, even like
100%.
when you're doing like AWS or GCP from the command line, it gives you a URL, you go to the URL, you type in your credentials, you do your MFA and everything, and then it gives you a session token that goes back into your command line that it stores so that you can continue your work. But that information can be, reused, right? So
absolutely,
so it's a very interesting, different world than, again, like I grew up in, and you have been doing incident response, and it may be, and I think it's definitely more prevalent now in the last 5 years. I think this trend's been going on for probably like 10 years, but I think that it's definitely feels like there's this flywheel effect between the capabilities and how powerful browsers are. Like you said, like it's an operating system today versus, and then the cloud and more cloud capabilities, new features that are coming out. And then the number of ideas that people are able to just put out into the world on SaaS because they don't have to acquire anything. The speed of this is just accelerating, and people are in the browser going from app to app to app to app, and managing the identity of everything. Extensions, OAuth scopes, all those things need to be managed better. Wow. I mean, but again, I'm curious. I mean, I guess you're seeing the same thing. I think you're telling me you're seeing the same thing. You're seeing it in the reports and stuff as well. So that's good to know. I'm glad we're on the same page.
It's surprising if our opinions are dramatically divergent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some diversion, I'd imagine, but really dramatic.
You're building your own cybersecurity team at the law firm now. What's your secret to building a strong cybersecurity team in the competitive job market? Especially
here in Southeast Asia, the amount of cybersecurity talent that is available is extremely short supply, which is kind of weird considering, for example, that there's in some way a lot of tech people right now in America due to layoffs and things like that. But here we just don't experience that at all. It's very short supply. And what I realized very quickly is that I cannot hire a big team, period. It'll never, ever happen. So what I chose to do is to look for really few key individuals that have the knowledge and can drive the service. So kind of the and go to my HR and say, your scales for this don't matter. It will never work. Forget about your rankings here. But I don't need a lot of them. And then I'm looking for partners that I can work with. So for example, we changed our approach that we did SOC, right? So previously we had SOC that sort of just told us like, there's an alert, you may want to investigate. And I'm like, I'll never investigate this. This will never happen. So we switched to a provider that detects, investigates, contains. And if they feel like I need to know about this, they send me an email. Otherwise, I get it in summary reports, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the approach that we did, because that was just an honest realization. We will never, ever do this. Yeah. If we want to have this ability, that's what it costs. And if we don't want to pay that, then we need to set our sights lower. Luckily, again, my leadership went like, Jude, we hired you to secure us, not to argue budgets. So, within reason, do what you need to do. Right. So I've been quite lucky, but that was the stark realization. I'll never, ever have a big team. I can only get a few key individuals that can enable the broader bit. And then we looked very quickly to how can we secure less? What can we ditch, right? So I think our number of like on-premises servers have shrunk by 50% since I came here. So working just with IT leadership to say, look, right, we really need this. Is there a service we can buy instead? SaaS, exactly like that. Is there something that somebody else that's SOC certified can do for us? And then my goal is to eliminate classes of problems. So for example, we didn't want to deal with identity issues much as we can. Mm. So our firm is going to move to fully passwordless. I mean, fully is a bit of an asterisk, but generally passwordless for remote authentication in about a month's time. I think we're going to call it end. So people have like one last app to migrate, I think. And then more people will no longer have passwords for their daily lives. They just won't exist. So that investment not only improved quality of life, but also allowed me to not have anybody think about that problem, right? So that's kind of my answer to this. I can't hire a big team. I'll never hire a big team. It's just not something I can do. And sort of my joke here in Singapore is that anybody who's good, they try to work for 3Gs. Google, Grab, or government, right? Yeah. Everybody else, is because Google, Grab, or government, there was not a good fit or the jobs weren't there at that time. So that's kind of that bit. So we're really trying to operate under the understanding is that we may get a few smart people. The rest of that has to be technology, service, money, partnerships.
Yeah. And so, you're learning about managing risk, right? You have availability risk, you have confidentiality risk. I think those are the two big things that I always worried about. And, a lot of it was, for me in my past has been just systems that weren't maintained. And if you can transfer that risk to a good SaaS provider, you're on your way to reducing availability and confidentiality kind of problems in that space. You're reducing IT workload, so that's good too. They can focus on more important kinds of activities, like patching the systems that you can't get off premise.
Exactly.
Or whatever that is. But yeah, I mean, you're transferring risk to better places. I think that's a good lesson to learn from this conversation.
And I think that goes back to your much earlier point is that and obviously financial services, I think, got smart about this. The first is that we all depend on the chain of suppliers and suppliers and suppliers and suppliers, right? So a lot of my work, which I kind of didn't appreciate coming into the job, was managing third-party risk. And I think after the first months, I called one of the big four and said, send me somebody here right now for next 6 months before I get somebody, because I'm drowning in this, right? So somebody came in and that was their main job was just get the third party risk at least started and going, and let's plow through the suppliers and get through all that stuff.
That's good. That's
Like,
good.
because a lot of people go like, oh, cyber is a lot of tech. I'm like, sure, but
Well, yeah, definitely a lot of processes, right? Definitely a lot of policies that you hope that gets implemented, right? Do we have tech to help us? Yeah, I mean, more tech the better, right? But still, I always feel cyber is a lot more strategic than people give it kind of credit for. It's like, because it's the technology is almost like the tail end of it. You really kind of have to understand, like, what is your business trying to do? There's some sort of technology strategy that happens for that. And then now you get to play and say, okay, how do we build a cybersecurity strategy around what the business wants to do and the technology that we're employing?
Exactly.
And then it's like making sure you have the guardrails. And the easiest guardrail is just communications, giving people guidelines, policies, education, awareness, and giving that opportunity there. Because once you start transitioning into technology, right, then friction comes, whether that's deployment frictions, behavior changes to your user community, or how you interact with your vendors. All of those technology changes create friction for the business that may or may not cause problems. In the long run, I think it's definitely reducing risk is great, using technology to do it, but there's so much other stuff that happens before you go and you say, I'm just going to deploy technology, right? So
yeah. And for me, like, one of those things that and maybe this is law firm specific or not, but a human is the productive unit, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely. You need to protect that availability.
Correct. And the less pain I inflict on the person, the more productive they are. There's like a correlation between happiness and sales in some way, right?
Yes.
You have to have miserable enough that they want to go after the sales, but not miserable enough that they feel disempowered and they want to do this. So
right.
A lot of the security changes I did early on was just to basically improve user experience. Like, we swapped EDR, not only because we wanted a different service, but that was just slow. And I'm like, that's bad.
Yeah.
Get it off.
Yeah.
Right?
But you make a great point. Great point. I mean, user experience is incredibly important, right? If, how people interact with your cybersecurity program and your technology is a make it or break it thing for you, right? Because what do they say? Like, the most secure system is the one that's turned off, right? Now no one can work, right? Now you have lots of friction. People are on typewriters and stuff, using fax.
We try to, I mean, like, and the availability requirements in some way are ridiculous, right? Like, we did a survey of how available we need to be, and we figured that our email availability, and this is the core business tool, like no other, is 2 hours. So that's it, like 2 hours. Right? If it's down for more than 2 hours, we're in a world of pain. There's a little bit of timing, like, we're probably okay between the 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. gap, right? So we maybe don't need it, but our people work from 6 to 2, right? Staggered shifts, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like really bad. And so I had to actually put another system in front of our existing email system to have a fallback. And I'm just hoping both of them never fall down at the same time, right?
Absolutely. So how did you get the partners in the firm to care about technical risk? I mean, they cared enough about technical risk that they were driven to hire a CISO in the first place, right? So there's some measure of understanding already. Was there more that you needed to do to get them to care more about technical risks?
I try not to talk about technical risks because the consistent feedback is like, great, but we just don't understand it. That's why we have you. So I essentially, my communication strategy very early on was to explain them who's after us, right? And like I said, there were the three main categories, which was the ransomware, the kind of the business email compromise type issues in that ecosystem. And also, we need to protect our own people from themselves, make accidents, and also if somebody is a bit upset. So we need to make sure we see that. And then I sort of told them, like, where we are risk-wise. And it was a very qualitative judgment there. And I said, we want to be in a space of one incident in 10 years risk space, right? And so that's the best I can explain this to you. It's like, it's not that we're going to be forever secure, right? Nobody can promise that, but we want to be, 1 in 10 or less. And this is what we have to do. And they went like, that aligns with how we think about this. And so that was great, right? That was literally the communication part was there. So we didn't talk about firewalls or so on. All we just said like, look, that's what we're there. That's how we mitigate this. That's the aggregate risk here. And then there were some business opportunities I was able to highlight. Look, we get these additional certifications, we maintain that, we're going to have an easier life communicating with the institutional clients. AI was a big thing as well.
Yep.
So we knew that we had to adopt more technology. So they were concerned about, everybody realized it changed afoot. So how do we secure that change? But it was not technology risk that was communicated. We explained how we use technology, but not that. That was not what I talked to my most senior
manager. About what it means to them from a business perspective, how much loss we were able to take over some period of time, and then what the investment was going to be to go and
bring loss of client trust is a huge concern. Huge concern.
Sure. Well, to end our episode, Konrads, what's one mindset shift every cybersecurity leader needs to make right now? I'm going to keep the hardest question for the last one.
Sure. I'll maybe share my aha moment, and I think that would be useful, is that if you can transform the technology rather than secure the technology, and in the result you get less risk, go for that. Don't put security in front of it, right? And that will probably, you'll need to traverse business, you'll need to talk to lots of other business units, you'll need to change a lot of things in the process, but that is going to be a far lasting, more important change that you're going to deliver than kind of just, put a stopgap under the bottom line. So if there's opportunity to transform rather than just secure, go for that.
Great way to end the show. Konrads, thanks for being on the show.
No worries. Thanks, John.